The bitter December wind cut through downtown Austin like a knife, sending trash tumbling across empty streets. At 2 a.m., most people were tucked away in their warm beds. But not Joe Rogan, and not the small, shivering figure he spotted huddled on a park bench outside his comedy club. Joe had just finished recording a late podcast episode at the comedy mothership when something made him stop. Through the orange glow of the street lamp, he saw what looked like a child's sneaker poking out from beneath a thin, ratty blanket. His heart stopped. "No way," he muttered, moving closer. "Hey, you okay there?" The blanket shifted slightly, revealing the face of a young boy, no more than 12 years old. His eyes were wide with fear, darting around like a cornered animal. Dark circles beneath them told a story of sleepless nights. This wasn't some random homeless person. This was a kid, alone in the freezing cold. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories about acts of kindness that change lives forever, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. Joe's martial arts instincts kicked in immediately. Stay calm. Assess the situation. Maintain a non-threatening presence. He'd interviewed countless experts on his podcast about childhood trauma, and knew sudden movements could trigger a flight response. The boy looked ready to bolt at any second. "My name's Joe," he said softly, keeping his distance. "I own the comedy club right there. It's way too cold to be out here tonight. Can you tell me your name?" The boy clutched his blanket tighter, eyeing Joe suspiciously. After what felt like an eternity, he whispered, "Tommy." Joe noticed Tommy's lips were slightly blue from the cold. Texas wasn't supposed to get this frigid. But tonight was different. The temperature had plummeted to near freezing, and the wind chill made it even worse. "Listen, Tommy," Joe said, slowly removing his thick leather jacket. "I'm going to give you my jacket, okay? No strings attached. You look like you're freezing." Tommy's eyes widened as Joe carefully draped the warm jacket over his shoulders. The gesture seemed to break through some invisible barrier. Tears welled up in the boy's eyes. I haven't eaten since yesterday," Tommy admitted, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Mom's in the hospital. They said they'd have to call CPS, so I ran. I can't go into foster care. I promised her we'd stay together." Joe's heart clenched. He thought about his own daughters, safe and warm at home. The thought of them ever being in this situation was unbearable. He discussed America's broken foster care system countless times on his podcast, but seeing its effects firsthand hit differently. "When's the last time you saw your mom?" Joe asked gently. 3 days ago," Tommy sniffled. "She got really sick at work. Couldn't breathe. The ambulance came and everything. I stayed at our apartment the first night. But then the landlord found out I was alone and said he'd have to report it." Joe nodded, his mind racing. He knew he had to handle this delicately. "You must love your mom a lot to try to protect her like this. But you know what? I bet she's worried sick about you right now." "What hospital is she in?" "St. David's," Tommy replied. "But I can't go back. They'll take me away." Joe pulled out his phone, quickly texting his wife to let her know what was happening. Then he called his friend Brian, a social worker he'd met through the comedy scene who specialized in helping at-risk youth. "Tommy, I know you're scared," Joe said, pocketing his phone. "But I promise you running away isn't the answer. I've got a friend who helps kids and families stay together. He knows all the legal ways to make sure you and your mom aren't separated. Would you trust me enough to meet him?" Tommy studied Joe's face intently. "Are you that UFC guy? The one who does commentary?" A small smile crossed Joe's face. "Yeah, that's me. You watch UFC?" "Sometimes," Tommy said, his voice gaining a hint of excitement. "At the shelter where Mom works. She's a cook there. She loves UFC too. Says it reminds her that even when you're down, you're never out of the fight." "Your mom sounds pretty wise," Joe said. "And she's right. But right now, you're not just down, you're freezing and hungry. There's a 24-hour diner around the corner. What do you say we get some hot food and you while we wait for my friend? If at any point you feel uncomfortable, you can leave. I promise." After a moment's hesitation, Tommy nodded. Joe helped him up, noticing how the boy swayed slightly from exhaustion. The diner was only a block away, but he made sure to walk slowly, giving Tommy space while staying close enough to catch him if he stumbled. The fluorescent lights of Jerry's all-night diner cast a warm glow onto the empty street. Inside, a few late-night regulars hunched over coffee cups, while a waitress named Gloria restocked the napkin dispensers. She looked up as the bell above the door chimed. "Joe Rogan," she exclaimed. "Haven't seen you in here for a while. And who's this young man?" "This is my friend Tommy," Joe said smoothly, leading the way to a booth. "We're gonna need some hot chocolate and whatever's hot and fresh in the kitchen." Gloria's experienced eyes took in Tommy's disheveled appearance and Joe's missing jacket. Her expression softened with understanding. "I've got fresh chicken soup and biscuits just came out of the oven. How's that sound, honey?" Tommy nodded eagerly, his stomach growling audibly. While they waited for the food, Joe kept him talking, learning more about his life. His mother, Maria, worked 2 jobs, cooking at the homeless shelter during the day and cleaning offices at night. They'd been getting by okay until she got sick, but with no health insurance and mounting bills, she'd ignored the worsening cough until it was too late. Brian arrived just as Gloria brought out the soup. He looked nothing like Tommy's image of a social worker, wearing jeans and a vintage Rolling Stones t-shirt. He slid into the booth casually, ordering coffee before introducing himself. "Rough few days, huh?" Brian said, his tone conversational. "Want to tell me about your mom?" As Tommy ate and talked, Ryan took notes on his phone, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Joe watched in amazement as the boy's defenses gradually lowered. Brian had a gift for putting people at ease. "Okay, here's what I'm thinking," Brian said finally. "Your mom's probably worried sick. How about we head over to the hospital? I've got some contacts there who can help make sure you two stay together. We'll need to find you a safe place to stay while she recovers. But I know a great temporary foster family who specializes in keeping families united. They've even got a therapy dog named Max who loves kids." Tommy looked uncertainly at Joe, who nodded encouragingly. "Remember what your mom said about UFC? Sometimes you've got to trust your corner team. Brian and I were in your corner now. What do you say?" The drive to St. David's Medical Center was quiet. Tommy pressed against the window of Joe's Tesla, watching the city lights blur past. Joe and Brian had agreed it would be better to arrive before visiting hours officially started, when things would be calmer. The night nurse at the ICU initially started to refuse them entry, but Brian quietly showed her his credentials while Joe distracted Tommy by telling him stories about memorable UFC matches. Within minutes, they were being led to Maria's room. She lay pale against the white hospital sheets, an oxygen mask covering her face, but her eyes flew open the moment Tommy entered. "Me Ehal," she cried weakly, tears streaming down her face as she reached for him. Tommy ran to her bed, careful of the 4 lines as he hugged her. "I'm sorry, Mama. I was so scared they'd take me away. I didn't know what to do." Maria looked over her son's shoulder at Joe and Brian, questions in her eyes. Brian stepped forward, explaining who he was and how he could help. Joe hung back, watching the family reunion with a lump in his throat. "Mr. Rogan," Maria said finally, her voice hoarse but determined. "My Tommy. He tells me you found him on the street, that you helped him." Joe moved closer to her bed. "I just did what anyone would do. But I want you both to know, you're not alone anymore. I've got some connections at the hospital, and Brian here is the best at what he does. We're going to make sure you get the care you need and that Tommy's taken care of until you're back on your feet." Maria's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I've worked at the shelter for 3 years, serving meals to the homeless. Never thought I'd almost be in that situation myself. I was so afraid of losing Tommy to the system." "That's not going to happen," Brian assured her. "I've already spoken to a great foster family who lives 10 minutes from here. They work specifically with cases like yours, where families need temporary support during medical crises. Tommy can stay with them while you recover, and I'll make sure he can visit you every day." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Brian handled the paperwork while Joe made calls, pulling strings to ensure Maria would receive the best possible care. He learned she had severe pneumonia complicated by undiagnosed asthma, entirely treatable conditions that had become life-threatening due to lack of medical access. By the time the sun rose, Tommy was settled in with his temporary foster family, the Hendersons. Their therapy dog, Max, had taken an immediate liking to him, barely leaving his side. Joe made sure both Tommy and Maria had his personal number before heading home. But that wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, as Maria recovered, Joe couldn't stop thinking about their situation. How many other families were one medical emergency away from crisis? How many kids ended up in the system unnecessarily because their parents couldn't access health care? He began discussing these issues on his podcast, sharing Tommy and Maria's story, with their permission, to highlight the broader systemic problems. His millions of listeners responded with an outpouring of support and similar stories. Working with Brian, Joe established the Second Chance Foundation, focused on helping families stay together during medical crises. The foundation provided temporary housing, medical bill assistance, and legal aid to ensure children weren't separated from their parents due to poverty or health issues. Maria's recovery took time, but with proper medical care and the stress of Tommy's care handled, she made steady progress. The Hendersons became like a second family, and Max, the therapy dog, had such a positive impact on Tommy that they began bringing him to visit other kids in similar situations. Joe checked in regularly, often bringing his daughters along. They helped Tommy with his homework and included him in their activities, showing him that his world could be bigger than survival. Maria, once recovered, was offered a better-paying job with benefits at the comedy mothership, where her cooking skills quickly made the green room a favored spot for visiting comedians. 6 months after that cold December night, Tommy stood on stage at a Second Chance Foundation fundraiser, telling his story to a room full of supporters. His voice was clear and strong as he described how close he'd come to falling through the cracks of the system. "I thought I was protecting my mom by running away," he said. "But what I learned is that sometimes protecting someone means letting others help. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is trust." Maria, healthy and glowing in a new dress, wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her son speak. Joe stood at the back of the room, remembering that skinny, scared kid on the park bench. The transformation was remarkable. The foundation grew beyond their expectations, expanding to other cities and helping hundreds of families stay together. Maria became an advocate for healthcare access, sharing her story with lawmakers and community leaders. Tommy excelled in school and started training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, discovering a natural talent for the sport. But perhaps the most significant change was in the ripple effects throughout the community. The story inspired others to pay attention, to stop and help when they saw someone in need. Other comedians and UFC fighters got involved with the foundation, creating a network of support for families in crisis. Joe often reflected on how close he'd come to missing Tommy that night. If he'd left the club a few minutes earlier or later, if he'd taken a different route to his car, if he hadn't looked twice at that park bench, but he had stopped, had looked, had acted. Sometimes the biggest impacts come from the smallest decisions, he said during a podcast episode about the foundation. We all have the power to change someone's life. We just have to be willing to stop, to see, and to act. The park bench where he found Tommy now bears a small plaque. Kindness changes everything. It serves as a reminder that in our darkest moments, help can come from unexpected places. That sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to stop and say, "Hey, you okay there?" Tommy and Maria still visit that bench sometimes, usually bringing donations for others in need. Max, the therapy dog, accompanies them, always ready to offer comfort to someone going through hard times. And Jill, he makes sure to walk past it every night after leaving the club, keeping an eye out for anyone else who might need a helping hand. Because that's the thing about kindness. It creates a cycle. Those who have been helped are often the most eager to help others. One act of compassion can ripple out to touch countless lives, creating a web of support that strengthens the entire community. The story of Joe Rogan and Tommy continues to inspire others to take action, to look out for their neighbors, to remember that we're all connected. Because sometimes, The simple act of stopping to help someone in need can start a chain reaction of positive change that extends far beyond that initial moment of kindness. And in Austin, when the December winds blow cold and the nights grow long, people remember that every great journey of transformation begins with a simple choice to care. They remember that we all have the power to make a difference, one small act of kindness at a time, because sometimes that's all it takes to change a life forever. 3 years after that fateful night, the impact of Joe's simple act of kindness had grown beyond anything anyone could have imagined. The Second Chance Foundation had expanded to 15 cities across America, helping thousands of families stay together during medical crises. But it wasn't just about the numbers. It was about the culture of compassion that had taken root. Tommy, now 15, had become a rising star in the youth BJJ circuit. His natural talent, combined with the discipline he'd learned through hardship, made him a formidable competitor. But more importantly, he'd started a peer mentoring program at his high school, helping other kids navigate difficult situations. "I know what it's like to feel alone," he told a group of students during a leadership conference. "But I also know what it's like to discover you're not alone at all. Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the strongest thing you can do is accept that help." Maria's role had evolved too. From her position at the Comedy Mothership, she'd built a network of restaurants and businesses committed to helping families in crisis. Her Meals with Dignity program had transformed how local establishments approached community service, proving that sustainable support could also be good for business. The Therapy Dog program, inspired by Max's impact on Tommy, had grown into a full-scale operation. The Hendersons now trained dozens of dogs and handlers, working with hospitals and shelters across Texas. Max himself, though older now, still had a special way of knowing exactly who needed comfort most. Joe had incorporated the lessons from that December night into every aspect of his work. His podcast became a platform for discussing social issues with real solutions, not just commentary. He regularly featured success stories from the foundation, showing his millions of listeners that positive change was possible. "You know what the real lesson was?" he reflected during the foundation's 3rd anniversary celebration. "It wasn't just about helping one kid on one cold night. It was about recognizing that we all have the power to create change. Every person who walks past someone in need has a choice to make. And those choices, they add up. They create ripples that become waves." The park bench had become a symbol of hope in Austin. Local artists had decorated it with subtle designs depicting transformation. Butterflies emerging from cocoons, dawn breaking through darkness. The original plaque remained, "Kindness changes everything." But now it was surrounded by hundreds of small tokens left by people whose lives had been touched by the foundation's work. Tommy and Maria still visited regularly, usually bringing hot meals and warm blankets for anyone in need. They'd often find others there doing the same thing, creating an informal network of support that operated 24/7. The city had installed better lighting and a small shelter nearby, making it a safe space for people to seek help. "Sometimes I try to imagine what would have happened if Joe hadn't stopped that night," Maria said during a recent interview. "But then I realized that's not the right question. The question is, how many other Tommies are out there right now? How many other families are one crisis away from falling apart? That's why we keep doing this work." The story had inspired similar initiatives across the country. Other celebrities and public figures had started their own programs, often consulting with Joe and the foundation to learn from their experience. But what made the Second Chance Foundation special was its focus on long-term, sustainable change. "It's not about handouts," Joe explained. "It's about creating a system where people can get back on their feet without losing everything they've built. It's about recognizing that any of us could be one emergency away from needing help. And it's about building a community that takes care of its own." As for that cold December wind that had brought them all together, it still blows through Austin on winter nights. But now, thanks to one simple act of kindness and the cascade of compassion it inspired, fewer people have to face it alone. Because sometimes the simplest choices have the most profound impacts. Sometimes, stopping to help one person can transform an entire community. And sometimes the real miracle isn't just the life you save, but the countless lives that are changed because you chose to care. The impact of that night continued to evolve in unexpected ways. The Second Chance Foundation had become a model for social change, studied by universities and policymakers looking to reform healthcare and social services. Tommy's story was now part of the training curriculum for social workers across the country, demonstrating how traditional systems could be improved through community-based solutions. Joe's podcast episodes about the foundation consistently ranked among his most popular, inspiring listeners worldwide to start similar initiatives in their own communities. The Stop and Help movement, as it came to be known, had spread to countries as far away as Australia and the UK, each adapting the model to their local needs while maintaining the core principle of immediate, practical assistance coupled with long-term support. Tommy, approaching his college years, had decided to pursue a degree in social work, determined to continue the cycle of helping others. His BJJ achievements had earned him a scholarship, but more importantly, they'd given him a platform to reach other young people facing similar challenges. When people hear my story, he often said during motivational speeches at schools, they focus on the moment Joe found me on that bench, but the real story is what happened after, how one person's kindness inspired others to be kind, how one moment of help turned into a lifetime of helping others. That's the real miracle. Maria had become a respected voice in healthcare advocacy, testifying before Congress about the need for comprehensive medical coverage for working families. The restaurant network she'd built through Meals with Dignity had expanded to include job training programs and emergency employment opportunities for families in crisis. The comedy mothership had evolved too, becoming known as much for its community outreach as for its comedy. Other clubs across the country had started implementing similar programs, creating a nationwide network of safe spaces where people could seek help without judgment. As Joe reflected on these changes during the Foundation's most recent fundraising event, he remembered something Tommy had said years ago on that cold December night. Mom always says there's still good people in the world. Looking around the room full of volunteers, supporters, and success stories, he knew that Tommy's mother had been right. There were good people everywhere. They just needed someone to take the first step, to show them how to help. Because in the end, that's what the story of Joe Rogan and Tommy was really about. Not just about one act of kindness on a cold night, but about the endless potential for positive change that exists in every moment, in every choice, in every person who decides to stop and ask, "Hey, you okay there?" And that's a legacy that will continue to change lives for generations to come.